Pay attention to Lauren Giddings, 27 years old, returning to her apartment in Macon, Georgia, in the early hours of June 26, 2011. She had just graduated from law school. Her bar exam was only weeks away. Her future stretched before her like a vast road. She had less than an hour to live, because in apartment number 4, right next door, a man was waiting. He had been waiting for a long time. He knew her schedule. He knew her habits. He had watched her go about her business more times than anyone could imagine. And on this night, while Lauren Giddings was thinking about sleep, her study materials, and tomorrow morning, this man had only one intention. One single, devastating intention. What he did next would shock the entire community. Lauren Giddings grew up in Maryland. She was a runner. She was an excellent student. She had worked hard for years to get where she was, earning her way through college and then through law school at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. She graduated in May of 2011, and like so many of her classmates, she stayed in Macon through the summer to prepare for the bar exam. She lived in an apartment complex on the edge of the Mercer campus. It was the kind of place where law students clustered together naturally, sharing the same hallways, the same parking lot, the same rhythms of study and exhaustion and occasional celebration. Lauren was comfortable there. She knew her neighbors. She trusted the people around her. That trust, as it turns out, was something someone had been exploiting for months. On the night of June 25th, Lauren went out with friends. It was a Saturday. They went to a bar, they laughed, they stayed out late. At some point, Lauren ended up back at a friend's place for the evening. When her friend woke up the next morning, Lauren was already gone. That was not unusual. Lauren was independent, always moving, always somewhere to be. But then the calls went unanswered, the texts went unreturned, and the hours stretched into something heavier than silence. By June 30th, 2011, friends and family could not take it anymore. They called police. They had not seen Lauren in days. She was not the kind of person who simply disappeared without telling someone where she was going. When investigators arrived at her apartment, what they found stopped them cold. Her car was in the parking lot. Her keys were inside. Her pocketbook was there. Her cell phone was there. Her laptop sat untouched on a table. Every single thing that Lauren Giddings would have taken with her was exactly where she had left it. Everything, that is, except Lauren herself. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had come into that apartment, Lauren had either let in herself, or they had found another way in without breaking anything down. This was not a woman who had walked away from her life. Something had happened to Lauren Giddings inside that building, and investigators were going to find out what. In the early stages of the investigation, police interviewed everyone connected to Lauren. Friends, classmates, her former boyfriend. The picture that emerged was of a young woman who was well-liked, stable, and connected. She had been in a relationship that had grown rocky, a man who admitted that when things got serious, he tended to pull back. But he was cooperative with police. He did not set off alarm bells. Others were interviewed too. Neighbors, classmates, anyone who crossed paths with Lauren regularly. And that is when investigators sat down with the man from apartment 4. His name was Stephen McDaniel, 26 years old, a Mercer Law School graduate from the same class as Lauren. He lived directly next door to her. They had walked home together sometimes after class simply because they were heading to the same place. They were both officers in a student organization through the law school. In that first conversation, Stephen McDaniel seemed helpful enough.
With me is her next door neighbor who lives in apartment 4. Can I get your last name?
McDaniel. Stephen McDaniel.
When was the last time you think you seen Lauren?
It was either last week or the week before that. I was coming back from bar prep and I was driving back and I saw her going out to run.
He said he and some others had looked around her apartment after she went missing, checking for a note or any kind of clue. They found nothing. He was calm. He was articulate. He was, by all appearances, just another concerned neighbor. But something about the case kept pulling investigators back to him. McDaniel had mentioned, almost in passing, that he had gone into other people's apartments, that he had taken things, small things, like condoms. It was enough to justify holding him on a burglary charge while the investigation continued. And then they brought him back in for more questioning. The man who walked into that second interrogation room was not the same man who had spoken so freely just days before. One-word answers, A blank stare. Long silences where there should have been sentences. The detective sitting across from Stephen McDaniel could hardly believe what he was seeing. Earlier that same day, McDaniel had sat with investigators and talked normally.
I need to know about this girl right here. You know her?
Yes.
Who is that?
Lauren Giddings.
Does she live next door to you?
Yes.
Okay. Look at me when you talk to me, son. Okay?
He had been animated, engaged, even chatty. Now it was like someone had reached inside him and turned off a switch. He stared at the table. He gave yes and no answers to questions that required explanation. He said, over and over again, I do not know. Investigators were baffled. Colleagues who knew McDaniel described him as talkative, friendly, the kind of guy who would stop and chat with anyone. But in that room, on that day, he had become almost catatonic. Detectives pushed. They asked him about his daily life. He admitted he mostly stayed inside. He played video games by himself. He bathed only a couple of times a week. He described an existence that barely touched the outside world. People who knew him confirmed that he existed on the margins, a loner, someone who seemed strange in ways that were hard to articulate. And then investigators started asking more personal questions. McDaniel admitted he watched pornography regularly on the internet. He admitted he was a virgin. There was reporting, investigators noted, that he had asked Lauren out at some point, and she had kindly told him she just wanted to be friends. McDaniel denied having any romantic thoughts about her at all. Nobody in that room believed him, but still. Strange behavior and an odd life were not enough to charge a man with murder. Investigators needed more. And then, right outside the apartment complex, they found it. The smell had been building for days. A few of the investigators kept noticing it, a foul odor drifting near the dumpsters. Finally, one of them opened a trash can. The smell hit him hard and fast. He reached down and felt the bag inside. What he found was a human torso. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already feared in their gut. The torso belonged to Lauren Giddings. A missing person case had just become a murder investigation, and the investigators already had a man they could not take their eyes off of. When detectives confronted Stephen McDaniel with the news about the discovery in the dumpster, his reaction told its own story.
What do you think happened to her?
I don't know.
Do you even care that no one can find her? I mean, I don't know, do you?
Yes.
Well, you know there was a body found in the trash can next to the apartments.
Yes.
And it's a female, white female's body, right next to y'all's apartment. We don't know 100% sure it's Lauren.
He sat there and theorized about it. He suggested that whoever put the body there had probably run out of time before the trash was collected. He said a complete stranger would not have taken the time to do something like that. He seemed almost analytical about it, clinical, as if he were discussing a case study rather than the remains of his neighbor. He kept saying he did not know who did it. Investigators were done being patient. The circumstantial evidence had started piling up in ways that pointed in only one direction. McDaniel smelled like cleaning products during one of the sessions, a sharp chemical scent that detectives noted immediately. He had a scratch on his chest, just below his sternum, that he claimed was a spider bite. Nobody bought that explanation either. When authorities searched his apartment, they found 3 guns and a samurai sword, along with other bladed weapons. They also found something far more disturbing on one of his jump drives: child pornography. It was, by the account of the law enforcement officers present, one of the hardest things they had encountered in their careers. And McDaniel had also, in a move that truly shocked investigators and sickened them, walked outside and given a media interview when news cameras arrived at the scene of Lauren's disappearance. He had stood in front of reporters and spoken about his missing neighbor, offering concern and confusion for anyone watching at home, including Lauren's mother, who saw her daughter's neighbor on television talking about her missing child. Investigators did not hide how they felt about that in the interrogation room. The detective laid into him. He told McDaniel exactly what he thought of a man who could stand in front of cameras and cry missing, while knowing full well what had happened to the woman everyone was searching for. McDaniel sat and absorbed it, his face blank, his answers unchanged.
Stephen, did you hurt Lauren?
No.
What'd you do, buddy?
I didn't do anything.
What'd you do to Lauren?
I didn't do anything.
But investigators were closing in, and what they were about to find would eliminate any remaining doubt. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation had been working the case hard, pulling apart every thread, following every lead. And buried in the evidence they collected was something that changed everything: a video. McDaniel had constructed a makeshift camera rig, attaching a recording device to a pole and using it to peer through Lauren Gittings's window. The footage showed him surveilling her apartment, watching her come and go, capturing her movements without her knowledge. He had been doing this for some time. He was not just a neighbor who happened to live next door. He was a stalker with an obsession that had been building in the dark for months. When investigators confronted him with this, his wall of denial barely shifted. But the video did not need his confession. It spoke for itself. More physical evidence poured in from every direction. A pair of Lauren's underwear was found in McDaniel's apartment, and DNA testing confirmed they belonged to her. Investigators sprayed luminol in Lauren's bathroom, and the room lit up like a Christmas tree. Blood was everywhere, not just on surfaces, but cut into the very enamel of the bathtub itself. Small striations where something sharp had been dragged back and forth. The evidence told investigators exactly what had happened in that bathroom. A hacksaw was found in the maintenance shed of the apartment complex. The shed was locked, and the key was found inside Stephen McDaniel's apartment. Testing revealed that the hacksaw contained Lauren Gittings's DNA, her blood, and her tissue. The packaging for the hacksaw was found in McDaniel's apartment as well. So was a receipt showing it had been purchased at a Walmart. Investigators had asked McDaniel in the interrogation room about his shopping habits. He had claimed he could not remember the last time he had been to Walmart. He had said he could not recall going to certain stores recently. He remembered a statue on campus with remarkable clarity when describing the law school, but he could not remember what he had done just 2 days before. The detective's question hung in the air with devastating effect. How can you remember a statue and you cannot remember what you did 2 days ago? McDaniel had no answer. He never did. The interrogation sessions that detectives conducted with Stephen McDaniel were unlike almost anything the lead investigators had seen in their careers. There was no good cop, bad cop dynamic. They came in strong. They came in with purpose. And as the evidence stacked up around him, they made sure he understood exactly what was happening.
Why'd you do it, Stephen?
I didn't do it.
Stephen! Why are you going to keep telling that? You hurt that girl!
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did, Stephen!
Detectives told him it was over. They told him they knew what he had done. They told him there would be no more video games, no more apartment, no more pretending he was just a quiet neighbor who had not seen Lauren in a couple of weeks. McDaniel continued to deny everything. He told them he did not do it. He told them he was being honest. He sat with his blank expression and his one-word answers and refused to give the investigators anything they could use. Then, at a certain point, he asked for his attorney. And just like that, the interrogations were done. But Stephen McDaniel's criminal case did not last long after that. Faced with the mountain of physical evidence, faced most critically with the surveillance video that showed him watching Lauren through her window, his defense team made the calculation that a trial was not survivable. In the end, Stephen McDaniel pleaded guilty to the murder of Lauren Gittings. He also wrote out a detailed, handwritten confession, and what he described in that confession is as chilling as anything investigators had encountered in the entire case. And the entire case, according to McDaniel's own written account, he snuck into Lauren Gittings's apartment in the early morning hours of June 26, 2011. He had likely returned home after the night out she had spent with friends, or she had come home in the night while he waited. He made his way inside, and he stood over her while she slept. When she woke up and found him there, he strangled her. He held her down and choked her for what he described as 15 minutes. She fought back. She scratched him. That was the mark on his chest that he had tried to explain away as a spider bite. Her fingernails had drawn blood during the struggle. After he killed her, he carried out the act that had already horrified an entire city. He dismembered Lauren Gittings in her own bathtub. He was clinical about it, methodical. He had purchased the tools in advance. The hacksaw from Walmart, retrieved from its packaging, which he kept in his apartment. He used the maintenance shed to store it once it had served its purpose, locking it away with a key he kept in his own home. He cut off her fingers and flushed them down the toilet because her scratches on him were evidence that connected her directly to his body. He disposed of the rest of her remains in trash dumpsters around the surrounding area. The torso ended up in the dumpster just outside the apartment complex, the one investigators found because the smell had become impossible to ignore. He then walked out of that building and went about his day. He played video games, he sat in his apartment, and when the news crews arrived and the cameras turned on, he walked outside and gave an interview about his missing neighbor. Investigators who had worked the case for years still talk about that moment with visible disgust. Lauren's mother saw that interview on television. She saw the young man from next door talking about her missing daughter, his face full of performed concern, while he already knew exactly where Lauren's remains were. There is something investigators noted during their deep dive into McDaniel's background that stands out as a chilling piece of context. Long before Lauren Giddings disappeared, Stephen McDaniel had reportedly been fascinated with the concept of committing the perfect murder. He would reportedly bring it up in conversations, pose the question to people, and then tell them they were wrong before launching into his own theory of how it could be done perfectly. His own family, by some accounts, had described him as crazy. That is a word that carries weight when it comes from the people who raised you and knew you longest. He had built a life on the margins of normalcy. He barely left his apartment. He had almost no physical contact with the outside world. He had asked Lauren out and been turned down. And rather than accepting that and moving on, he had channeled whatever lived inside him into something far more sinister. He rigged a camera to a pole and pressed it against her window. He watched her. He studied her. He built up an obsession over weeks and months while walking beside her to class and saying hello in the hallway, like a neighbor, like a friend. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. He had thought about this for a long time. He believed he had figured out how to do the unthinkable and walk away from it. But somebody always leaves something behind at a crime scene. Always. McDaniel left behind a receipt from Walmart. He left behind hacksaw packaging in his apartment. He left behind a key to a maintenance shed that held a bloody weapon. He left behind Lauren's DNA on stolen underwear. He left behind a scratch that drew blood during the fight he pretended never happened. He left behind a video he had made with his own improvised camera rig, footage of himself stalking the woman he later killed. And he left behind the memory of standing on camera and speaking to reporters, his neighbor's blood still on his hands in every sense of the word, while her family watched from hundreds of miles away and prayed she was still alive. Number 9. When McDaniel's guilty plea was entered, the case moved towards sentencing. There was no dramatic trial, no drawn-out courtroom battle. The evidence had been too overwhelming. His defense team had seen the video and made the only calculation that made sense. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole not before 2041. For the investigators who had worked the case, who had sat across from him in that interrogation room and pushed while he stared back at them with his blank face and his I do not know answers, the sentence brought something close to relief. Not satisfaction exactly, because nothing restores what was lost, but relief that he was exactly where he needed to be. As one detective put it simply, he hoped the sentence brought some closure and some justice to Lauren and to her family. And he was glad that Stephen McDaniel was locked away somewhere he could not harm anyone else. But the story did not end entirely with the sentencing. In the years following his conviction, McDaniel has fought repeatedly to have his guilty plea thrown out. He has argued that his lawyers were inadequate and that prosecutors used evidence improperly during the investigation. He has worked through the courts to try to undo what was done, to find some procedural crack in the case that might give him a path back out into the world. Court after court has rejected those appeals. The evidence was too solid. The confession was his own words. The video was his own actions. The hacksaw had Lauren's DNA on it and his key in his pocket. There was no procedural technicality that could make any of that disappear. Stephen McDaniel will be eligible for parole consideration in 2041. He will be in his mid-50s by then. Lauren Giddings will be forever 27. The case of Lauren Giddings is one that stays with people who learn about it, and it is not hard to understand why. She was brilliant, she was driven, she was weeks away from taking the bar exam and launching a legal career she had worked her entire young life to reach. She had friends who loved her, a family who adored her, a future that was right there in front of her, and she was killed by the man next door. The quiet neighbor who had turned a casual friendship into a secret obsession, the man who had walked beside her to class and smiled in the hallway and all the while was watching her through a camera on a pole pressed against her window. The details of her final hours are almost impossible to sit with. The idea that she came home from a night out with friends, stepped into her apartment, and closed the door on a world she would never see again. The idea that she woke up to find someone standing over her in the dark and fought as hard as she could in those final moments, hard enough to scratch him, deeply enough to leave a mark. She fought. She was brave even then. What happened to Lauren Giddings is a reminder of something investigators say regularly, something families of victims repeat in courtrooms and on television in the hopes that someone will hear it. The danger is not always a stranger in an alley. Sometimes it is closer than that. Sometimes it is the person who knows your schedule, knows where you hide your key, knows which way you like to run in the evenings, and has been watching you from the apartment next door. There were warning signs with Stephen McDaniel that only became visible in hindsight. The strange behavior, the reclusive life, the conversations about committing the perfect murder, the asking out and rejection that he never seemed to process or move past. Any one of those things in isolation might have seemed odd, but harmless. Together, they painted a picture that the evidence confirmed with devastating clarity. One of the detectives involved in the case put it plainly and without flinching in the interrogation room, speaking directly to the man across the table. Thought you were smarter than everybody. But you made a mistake. Somebody always leaves something at a crime scene. Stephen McDaniel left plenty. Number 11. And Lauren Giddings, who deserved to pass the bar exam and build a career and live out every day of the life she had worked so hard to earn, is remembered not just as a missing person or a victim, but as a young woman of tremendous promise who was loved fiercely by everyone who knew her. Her family carried that love into courtrooms, into appeals hearings, into every moment where the system threatened to turn away or move on. They never let the world forget her name. Lauren Giddings, 27 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she deserved every single day of it.